What would you do if...
Hello, welcome to Creative by Konstantin, where we deliver to you life hacks from music's best. Before we begin, click like and subscribe so that you know when our next episode is out. Right now, I would like to introduce to you one of the leading pianists of our generation, renowned music educator, Antonio POMPA-BALDI. And we're going to talk shop, competitions, audition techniques, tips. So stay tuned, because I know there's a great deal of interest among piano students in what we're going to discuss. And now, hello, Antonio.
Hello, Konstantin. First of all, let me say how wonderful it is to see you and to be with you today, and to see that you have channeled your immense creativity, yet found another avenue for it. So that's absolutely wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm delighted. You know, the podcast is as good as its guests, and I just couldn't dream of better.
Thank you.
So well, let's start at the beginning. I think it's always kind of interesting to know what prompted you to become a pianist. You know, was there an event or a person in your life when you were very, very young that just sort of inspired you to dedicate yourself and your life to piano?
It's actually kind of interesting in that maybe it's a little different than you will hear from a lot of musicians. I didn't have any musicians in my family. And also, when you consider where I was born, a small provincial town in the southeastern part of Italy, we didn't have a great musical tradition. There is one claim to fame. My hometown is the same hometown as Umberto Giordano. Mm-hmm. So that is the only figure in classical music, you know, that has come to prominence from that city of Foggia, by the way. That's my hometown. So I had no classical music in the family, but my mother, I think, is very musical, very musically inclined. And they loved to listen to pop music. And at that time, you know, they grew up with the Beatles and rock and roll and things like that. And that was the pop music was, you know, the only music I was exposed to when I was very, very, very young. And then suddenly there was this television broadcast. My parents told me, because I don't remember. I was about maybe 3 years old. And so this television broadcast on national television, suddenly there was this pianist playing a concerto for piano and orchestra. I have no idea who was playing which piece, but apparently I was a very restless child. And even so, I became frozen, listening to this piece and protesting if my parents tried to change the channel. And when it was over, I started crying because I didn't want it to be over. And then I started asking my parents to give me a piano because I wanted to play. And so they thought it was something that would go away in a few hours or days, but it didn't. So they bought me a toy piano, and it was an itty bitty thing. I don't remember, maybe 2.5 octaves. And it was literally a toy. When I say a keyboard, that's a glorified, you know, way of calling it. And so I
had those too.
Yeah,
I know them. I had a couple of those.
Yeah. And so I started. Yeah, exactly. So I started picking songs or movie soundtracks from Disney movies, you know, by ear. And I taught myself sort of how to play a little bit. So my mother at that point decided that, you know, it was really time to maybe find a teacher. And they didn't know anybody. So they asked around, they asked some friends. And that's how we got to meet this gentleman. And the funny thing is, by the time this happened, I was 4 years old. And we went to his house, and to me, he looked older than Methuselah, because, you know, he was much older than my grandparents. Right. So my mother and father were very young when I was born, and her parents were very young when she was born. So there wasn't this huge difference, this gap in age. And this gentleman could have been, and probably, actually, I think he was exactly as old as my great-grandfather.
Wow.
And he was only in his late 60s, believe it or not. So, but to me, he looked so old. And I was completely intimidated, completely scared. It turns out when I got to meet him, he was the sweetest person ever, the most patient man, and the warmest person you could ever meet. Now, the interesting thing is he was not a professional musician. He had a day job and he worked at a post office. But he was an amateur musician, and he played a little bit of every instrument, but had never been a professional pianist, never professionally trained in piano, but he composed as well. And he was very talented as a musician.
Extraordinary.
And he taught me, believe it or not, when I was 4 years old, he started teaching me music theory in a way that was relatable and easy to understand. But he started talking about the physics of the propagation of sound to a 4-year-old.
Wow.
And if I go back and think of it now, I think it's a miracle that he made me interested in this. And so we started thinking about harmony, and everything was about music, not so much about technique. And when I was playing for him, he never talked about how to play physically, or never stressed too much about posture or about exercises. Everything was about music, And I did play etudes, but it was always from a musical standpoint. I did play some scales, but it was mostly to learn about the patterns of the fingerings, etc. Not worried about how to articulate the fingers or how to speed them up or how to make them strong, nothing of the like.
Well, I may be, of course, wrong, but it sounds to me like a very specifically a quality of Italian people, of the country, that is so musical and its music is just part of life. It's not a job or a craft, which it is, of course, and people perfect it. But I think a relationship with music in Italy is very unique to the world. It's like what happened with the pandemic. When people stayed at home, they got on their balconies and began to sing opera. I mean, it just doesn't happen so much in other countries.
It is very true, Konstantin. But the only thing I have to say is I was also lucky because whereas in normal life, non-professional people have this relationship with music that's very natural. And I know a lot of people who could be great musicians just never got around to getting a training or anything like that. As a people, we are very musical. But the thing is, when you get into professional teachers and pedagogues, there is a little bit of a fixation with technical matters, which is in common with other schools in the world and so on, other countries. And I was lucky to be spared that. I was never inflicted that upon me. I never had it inflicted upon me.
Well, and yet you have some of the best technique around. So, I think one cannot be without the other, but it is so wonderful that you place, sort of musical value above just purely mechanical value of playing the piano.
Yeah, I actually have to say, when people ask me that question, it may sound like I'm trying to shock somebody, but I'm not, because what I say is, if I have a good technique, it's because I don't have any. I do not have any technique at all. Because to me, I've never even isolated the matter. It's always been one and the same. The technique is so intertwined with the phrasing, the sound effect, and everything else that goes on in the music, the agogic, everything, and the concept, that you basically eliminate it as a problem, and you integrate it so much that it's just inseparable from the concept, the musical concept.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I always thought of technique as just playing the piano beautifully. Not there's the mechanics of it, and then there's musicality, and they exist in their own parallel universes. But it is a frequent thing that we, everybody at some point in their lives gets a little preoccupied with technical things. And it's easy to lose that track and to kind of isolate it on its own. And, so fast forwarding your childhood years, obviously you got wonderful training with great teachers, but then you became sort of, a superstar winning pianist, and you've essentially collected some of the world's most desirable and prestigious awards. And now you're on the jury of so many competitions. And I guess what I'm interested in, what was it like to, say, win the Cleveland competition and then go on to Clyburn? What was your experience at that time as a young artist who already, you know, had a beginning of a great international career?
Well, first of all, thank you. I do not feel at all like a star. But the one thing that I can say is it's not the competitions. I've always had a relationship that was like hate and love. It's not uncommon, I know that, because the truth and the matter is that it's impossible to really rank people, rank artists, especially when you get to a certain stage where even getting into one of these competitions requires a certain level of achievement, where you already have your artistry with you and your package. And personality and so on. So that being said, it is necessary, I think, to be able to make choices, even especially now that I am one of the jury members. I always remind myself that it's not an exact science, first of all, and we have sometimes very visceral reactions to things that sometimes we cannot even explain or control, like why we fall in love with somebody. I think it's very similar, don't you think? You listen to something, of course, there are some parameters. Something can be great, something can be absolutely wrong. We can make that distinction, but for the most part, again, when you get to enter the Cleveland competition or the Clyburn or the Marguerite Long or the Leeds, the Queen Elizabeth, you already know what is right and what is wrong, you know? So it's just a matter of taste, and it's a matter of luck too, because you have to perform at your best in the moment, and you have to find a jury whose collective sensitivity is closer to yours or receptive to what you're doing. So it is really, like many say, like winning a lottery. To be at the right time at the right place. And there is a famous phrase that goes around in Italy that I've heard many times, and I quote a lot when I'm asked the question, just not because I want to like demean competitions, but because it's funny and it tells you something. Oftentimes, competitions are thoroughbreds judged by donkeys.
I love that. That is so good. Oh my God. Well,
now supposedly, if I said it when I was a contestant, I was insulting people. But I say now I'm on the side of the donkeys.
Look, we're at some point one ends up on both sides, sort of sequentially. But it is true sometimes that the level of proficiency of playing right now is probably historically the highest. But and people and proliferation of competitions is remarkable also. I mean, there are a great number of very wonderful, good, competitive events, one can call them, around the world. And as you know, of course, pianists really, really love participating in them because it possibly is an opportunity to kind of launch a career. But a lot that brings with it, though, is that anxiety of winning, and the competitiveness of the competition sometimes overrides, the artistic value and the pedagogical value that it can bring to such participation when it's done, in a sort of psychologically, I don't know, sound or healthy way.
Right. So I just wanted to add, you asked me about what was it like to do. So having done, having made this premise that there is this hatred and love at the same time, but you're absolutely right. If you are, even today, the world today has many more avenues and chances of finding windows of exposure. Right now, the younger generations could potentially skip the whole competition process and become proficient and talented in reaching out through social media and the internet in general, and find an audience that way, find an outlet that then can translate into a career in live performances, if that's what they wish and they have the means. And there is no question, and some people have done that, and there is no question that they are talented and they're just as good as many of the competition winners around. But if you grew up in our time, and I'm a little bit older than you, of course, but the thing is, for both of us, when we were growing up, because things have changed so much. I mean, if you think that YouTube exists, I believe, since 2005.
Yes.
So was that your Cleveland competition year, 2005 or?
2003.
Okay, there you go. So your competition prize predates even the birth of YouTube, and mine, not even mention mine.
I know, no, I remember because you had just won when I moved to this country in 99.
Right, 99, correct. So, but what I'm saying is the world has completely changed. But for us, it was necessary, especially if you are not born in a very well-connected or very wealthy family, then the only opportunities, I don't even want to say to launch a career, but at least to start getting recognition and to have sort of a bona fide stamp on your credentials, was to go through a competition. And in the best case scenario, you can also start a competition. But this is more and more a rare occurrence that one competition can overnight start a career, just because there are, like you said, so many talented pianists and so many competitions. And by the way, nowadays, even the small competitions are very competitive because the general level across the board is very high. It is the world is smaller. There is more accessibility to great masterclasses. Again, let me just open a parenthesis. When I was a child, we did not have a record store in my town. And of course, as I said before, there was no computers, no internet. So to find those recordings, I had to rely on my teacher, maybe making me a copy on a cassette of whatever he had, and I had to beg for it. And then, or I befriended a man who worked in my public library, and they had a very small room with a collection of recordings, and they were not supposed to lend them out. So I went there when I discovered this, and I started listening to those few recordings they had. And I distinctly remember, for example, they had Radulupu playing Brahms and things like that. So, and then I had to beg that man to make me a copy, which he absolutely was not allowed to. His job entailed that he just work as a custodian, but he couldn't lend this material and couldn't make copies, but he did for me. So, and I treasured those recordings. But so you see how difficult it was to get exposed. And we didn't have great artists coming through town. Very, very rarely. I remember once a great Spanish pianist, Joaquin Achucarro, came to my hometown. That was an event, but not many famous pianists came to our hometown. And so if you don't have if you cannot be exposed to that, the only way that you can play for people who are recognized, the only way that you can perhaps let the world know about you is to go through competitions. And so it was in that spirit that I entered them. And when I made my way to the more important ones, I remember the first big one was the Marguerite Long in Paris. That was my first big competition. And I got all the way to the final round, and I couldn't believe it myself, because I was like, it was such an encouragement that I got, because I didn't know whether I could fit into, as far as my level, that kind of event and how far I could go. And this was just 6 months before the Cleveland competition. And as a matter of fact, after I got a prize in the Marguerite Long competition, it was the artistic director of that event that told me about Cleveland. I didn't know anything about the United States. She said, you know, next year the Cleveland competition is going to take place. I highly recommend it. It's a very good event. So I started looking into it. And that's how I ended up applying.
Remarkable.
And when I finally found myself there, I have to say, what struck me and what seemed to me wonderful was that even though I did not speak the language, I did not know anybody. I only knew one name of the members of the jury. Well, no, two. I knew Dominique Merlet wonderful pianist, French pianist, but I didn't know him personally. And I knew the name of Benedetto Lupo, who is an Italian pianist, obviously from my same region, but we had never met, but I knew of him.
Right.
But everybody else I didn't know. So what I'm trying to say is you could find, I was amazed that I could find myself winning first prize in a major competition without knowing anybody and without having any help. Because, you know, believe it or not, that's the other problem with competitions. There is always, or often there is problems of integrity, often there is problems of transparency, and it's a little bit too much of an incestuous world where teachers present their students and then they want to support them. And that was always the problem in Europe.
Well, I'm afraid sometimes to a degree it still remains.
Yeah.
Particularly in Europe, but I have to say that by observation and participation, in my experience, for the most part, in the major league, as it were, competitions in the United States in particular, I think the jury members, you know, artists of such caliber that they understand the value of what they do goes far beyond immediacy of aiding your own student.
Yes, absolutely. That's true. And in Cleveland, it was, to me, it was obvious because, again, as I said, I was perfectly unknown and I myself didn't know anybody, didn't even ever be, I was never even in the same room with any jury members or anybody of the organizers. And so for me, that was such a breath of fresh air, not only because I won the prize, but because it really made me believe that this was possible, that you can have a competition and have integrity. I have to say, even at the highest level of competitions, it's not always like that. And the concept that you can present your own students in competition, to me, should be completely banned. Unfortunately, it's not.
Yeah, no, I agree. I know. And you know, my mentor and teacher, Jerome Lowenthal, wonderful, great American pianist, who is also on the jury of all of them.
I was with him on the jury of Cleveland.
Yeah, he always recuses himself when his students are in a competitions, which they are because he has, you know, many and they're very, very good. But I always sort of thought it was such a absolute standard of professional courtesy, really, and you know, behavior, decorum,
integrity,
do that. But I had this great example before my eyes, and in him always just, you know, just leaving the room and not voting, not saying, not doing anything, because that's the way one ideally would expect. Sure. You know, a great musician to also be a jury member. And then, of course, but how interesting that one organizer, Marguerite Long, who alerted you about Cleveland piano competition, led this chain of events, almost like, you know, on these Hollywood movies that retro engineer themselves. And there you are now living in Cleveland, distinguished piano professor at Cleveland Institute of Music for nearly 20 years. Is that so?
Yeah, I started teaching at CIM in 2003, but before I taught it, and of course CIM is my home, it has been for, like you said, almost 20 years.
Right.
But before, you know, in this region, and not so many people know, when I travel around, people don't know how beautiful and how wonderful the, first of all, the city has become here in Cleveland, but also how much culture there is, and specifically musical culture. Of course, people may know about the Cleveland Orchestra, but also, you know, we have the Institute of Music, and not too far from Cleveland, you have another major conservatory, which is Oberlin, which is also a wonderful school. And I used to teach at Oberlin. I did teach there for 1 year. That was my first teaching position. It was just a 1-year position because I competed for it to replace a professor, Professor Takash, who was taking a sabbatical. And so I got offered the job. And it's crazy because everything happened at once. So anyway, chronologically, first I won the Cleveland competition in '99. I still lived in Italy, and my wife and I were traveling back and forth when I was playing a lot of engagements. Then we decided to move to the United States in February 2001. And that same month, I auditioned for the job at Oberlin, and I also auditioned for the Clyburn competition. And I got into the Clyburn and I got the job offer from Oberlin. And so then I won the Clyburn prize and I started teaching at Oberlin right away. So everything sort of happened at the same time.
the universe was telling you something, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But also, if I may mention, weren't you just very, very recently married to Manuela when all this was happening? You were
Yeah.
newlyweds.
Yeah. So when I did the Marguerite Long competition, this was December 1998. We were engaged, but we didn't. I mean, we had been dating for 3 years, but or actually 2.5. But we were not sure when we would get married. You know, we wanted to be on a like on a more solid financial ground. And so I have to say, we used the prize money from the Marguerite Long to, that gave us the...
The wedding.
Yes. And, and also, you know, the down payment on our first house. But, but the thing is, that's also when we decided on a date to get married, because I didn't want to travel to Cleveland, first time to the United States, by myself. We wanted to come together. But so we got married 2 weeks before the competition started. And it was in the middle of July of 1999. And then the competition started at the beginning of August. So we didn't have a honeymoon right away. I was
just going to say, did you honeymoon in Cleveland too?
Well, we did. So the story goes like this. We came to Cleveland, and, you know, after we got married, I spent a lot of time practicing. Then we traveled to Cleveland, and we stayed in the dorms of CIM. That's where the competitors were housed at the time. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't a very glamorous place, but it did the trick. But the thing is, I always told Emanuela, if I don't pass the first round or the second round, whenever I actually said, whenever they eliminate me, we go to Niagara Falls, and this will be our honeymoon because it's not too far. Mm-hmm. And of course, I wasn't eliminated, so we didn't go. And the funny thing is, we never got to go. Actually, we haven't gone yet. After so many years, it's one place we haven't visited. Our honeymoon was that year in October. We did go. I took advantage of some engagements I had in Paris, and I had about 15, 20 days in the middle. So we stayed in France, and we, you know, we spent a wonderful time in the fall in France. That was our honeymoon that year.
Oh, that sounds beautiful. That sounds so good. Well, you know, that's when you and I met, and Manuela, of course, right then, sort of in early 2000, I think. And so I remember you guys were just starting out and recently married, and I think, you know, everything was coming together for you. Yeah,
that was the kindness of Paul Shenley. Even before I became a professor at CIM, Paul, of course, was the head of the piano department at CIM for many years, and he, as you know very well, he runs Piano Fest in Long Island, such a wonderful festival that he has grown with such love and care, and it was wonderful to be a guest there. I was there a couple of times, and the first time is when we met. You were studying at Juilliard then.
Yes, I think I was a sophomore at Juilliard. Oh my God. Yeah. Years ago. Of course, well, I feel like I just have to also mention your beautiful daughter, who is a cellist.
Thank you. Yes. She started out playing the piano when she was 5. On her own will, but then when she was around almost 8, 7.5, she asked if she could switch to the cello, and the way she did was so cute. Her name is Eleanor, by the way, and one day I was driving her to school. She must have been in 2nd grade, and she was sitting in the back, and she was fidgeting, and she was very nervous. And so I said, "Is something the matter?" And she was like, "I want to tell you something, but will you promise me not to get mad?" And I was like, what did you do? And so I said, "No, okay, just don't worry, tell me." And she was like, "You know, would you be terribly disappointed if I started playing the cello instead of the piano?" And inside, I just wanted to burst out laughing, but I didn't. I tried to keep a straight face. And I said, "No, that's wonderful. But can I ask you why? I just hope that you don't think that the cello is easier than the piano, and you're trying to, in your mind, maybe choosing an easier path, because there is no easier or more difficult. It's just different." And she was like, "No, Daddy, it's just that when I hear the cello, it's like it makes," she said something like, "It's like the human voice, and it makes me emotional," something like that. From a 7-year-old, 7.5. Wow. It was really like profound. I know it's something obvious that we all know. It's true, by the way, but to hear it from such a little girl, it was like, okay. And so that's how she switched. And immediately, I have to say, she showed that that was really her path, because her connection to the instrument was much stronger than she ever had with the piano. So perhaps when she was around 5 years old and she asked us to learn the piano,
Right.
maybe she did it because she thought it was something she needed to do, because both my wife and I are pianists. And it didn't occur to her that she could actually pick anything else she liked. But when she matured a little bit more and she made that connection and she was able to articulate it, then that was wonderful that she did. We're very happy. And by the way, we already have 2 pianists in the house, so absolutely delighted we don't have a third.
Right. Well, you know, you're slightly unusual in a music dynasty, as it were, or how they go, because a lot of the time the instrument gets passed, you know, from generation to generation. That's also not the case with me. My parents aren't musicians at all, but many of my musician friends tend to somehow or another end up playing the same instrument that their parents. But I think you're incredibly sensitive in that respect. But do you guys make music together?
Yeah. Yeah, with Eleanor, I mean, usually, especially now, you know, now it's getting really to be fun for both Emanuela and myself. Not that it wasn't before, but when she was playing the repertoire, very simple pieces, it was different. But now she's playing Brahms' First Sonata. She just started Shostakovich Sonata. Sometimes we are accompanying her in concertos, like she's played Haydn Concerto, now Saint-Saëns Concerto. So this is great repertoire. It's great music. And so it's totally fun. Emanuela, I would say, gets to play with Eleanor a little bit more often for one reason, that even though we might rehearse together or prepare something together, it could be that when she has an audition or a performance, I'm out of town playing myself. And so Emanuela is just as busy as me, but she's more residential in her job. So she's away from Cleveland much less than I am. So it's a safer bet that if Eleanor has something going, then Emanuela will be her pianist. But we do switch and we play together. And so it's beautiful because Emanuela and I also play together in duo. Yes. As a matter of fact, last year we were playing again several concerts together. And so there is like a three-way thing, you know, and we all make music together. So we like
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Now, I wanted to ask you, of course, in the nitty-gritty of the competitions and auditions and all those wonderful things that everybody's dying to know all about. I know you have your own festival in Italy, Todi Piano Masters. Tell me, how did that come about and just more about it?
I will tell you in all honesty how it came about, being careful not to offend anybody by not naming names.
Okay.
And this premise will be understood in a moment. The reason I have my own festival, even accounting for my own awareness that I absolutely am not perfect, but the reason I started it was because I was so tired, so fed up with the complete and utter chaos I found in other summer festivals I was a guest at. Of course, I will not mention which one or which ones, because that would be very indelicate. But it was really serious, though. It was really serious, because you know what happens, as you may know, when you are invited as a professor, guest professor or guest artist at a festival, the organizers invite you, or should invite you, out of not even professional courtesy, but just out of mutual esteem, where they judge that you can do a good job and provide some good components to the festival artistically.
Right.
But they also have to look at the numbers and ask you to promote their event and in a way recruit some students for it. So you end up trying to do that. And then when you invite students or young pianists you're in touch with to a particular festival, you become sort of responsible for what happens in a way, or at least if things don't go well, you feel accountable and you feel down, even though you didn't organize it. So it may be that young people were promised certain things if they joined, and then these things were not delivered. It might be that they are assured they will be guaranteed some practicing time every day, and then they go there and there is no pianos to practice. Some small things like that, whatever it may be.
Yes.
And I found that some places it was so chaotic that it was all of this together and more. And I remember a pianist coming from such a far place like Brunei, coming to Italy to attend this festival and play. And her first lesson with me, and we go to the piano that we were assigned, and this piano is an upright with a broken pedal. Right pedal doesn't work. And the girl was playing Un Sospiro. Now, you cannot play that piece without pedal. You cannot play hardly anything, but
right.
Unless you're Schiff, and you can play Bach without pedal.
Right.
But you know what I mean.
Of course. I mean, look, I've been in the exact same situation, not too many times, because I got just very, very, I do like my research so specifically. But yeah, it's terribly frustrating. I lost sleep over that because, you feel really responsible, like administration, guilty, but responsible.
In the end, when I tried to say something, the organizers didn't take it very well. They thought I was insulting them, or at least that's what it seemed like, which wasn't my intention at all. Anyway, so to make a long story short, I decided to try and do this myself. So I, quote unquote, stumbled upon one of the most beautiful little towns in central Italy, Todi, in the Umbria region, surrounded by beauty, and not far from Rome, not far from Florence. But even if you don't go as far as Rome or as far as Florence, immediate surroundings are just unbelievable. And so I, through a relative of my wife, so now obviously an acquired relative of mine, she mentioned Todi, and she knew some people there. And so she made the introduction. I visited, I fell in love with the town. I found that the people I collaborate with are absolutely wonderful. And so that's how in 2015, the Todi International Music Masters was started.
Fabulous. Well, it sounds like it's just a must thing for pianists to check out.
Well, thank you. I hope so. And what I want to say is that we are a small festival. I limit the number of participants. There is a growing trend in the world of festivals that you have to have as many professors as possible, like 100 teachers, and as many students as they can recruit, because of course it generates more revenue. But the thing is, we try to really maintain it relatively small. So we have 5 professors, no more, and we have no more than 50 students every year. But we are able to offer a collegiality and an interaction of everybody with everybody. We are able to offer performances to everybody, including with chamber orchestra. And everybody gets to rehearse and perform a movement of a concerto with orchestra. And a lot of the students have never had that opportunity before. Then we guarantee to everybody 4 hours of daily practice time. Everybody has their assigned practice time. There's no conflict. So, and everything happens under the same roof. It's a very large medieval palazzo.
Well, that's amazing.
Which is only steps away from the main square of the town. Everything is easy logistically, and the people are so friendly. And most importantly, Todi is one of the safest places in Europe. You can walk around in the middle of the night and feel and be absolutely safe.
Absolutely. So, well, and of course, and the food and wine in the region is delightful.
Not to mention. Yes.
Not to mention. Well, when is the next one, and are there contingency plans in terms of current pandemic of COVID-19? Obviously, putting everything into either deferment or virtualizing it?
I decided not to virtualize it. So I decided to just cancel 2020 and consider this entire year as a sabbatical or a leap, not only leap year because we had an extra day in February, but the whole year. Just let's skip over it and let's go to 2021 already. That's what we are going to do, because this special relationship that we have with the students, this interaction and the offerings of performing with the orchestra and so on, you cannot replicate that online. You could, but only very limitedly.
Right.
So it was very sad when we decided to do this, but we thought it was the only way.
No, in this particular case, it makes sense. It sounds like the right thing to do. You can't virtualize being in Umbria.
Yeah, no. No.
But speaking of virtualization, however, I know that CIM has a brilliant initiative, like so many of the leading conservatories in the world, but particularly in the United States, I have to say, that will offer great value in music education to students while we all have to remain at home. So I would love to hear more about it, the Summer Audition Intensive.
Yeah, thank you for asking this, because it's very interesting. First of all, the pivot to online teaching had to be necessarily, not just for us, everywhere, very quick. We had to, like, one day we were teaching in our classrooms or in our studios, and then the next day we had to be teaching online. Fortunately, most everybody has good equipment and good technology nowadays. And especially here in the United States, we have good Wi-Fi that allows us to do this. But for this initiative that you're referring to, this is a slightly different thing. And I love it. I'm looking forward to it. We have not one, but two audition intensive, or we call it piano audition intensive, but it's not actually just about auditions. It's about performing skills, enhancing your performing skills, and planning how to prepare for a big event, such as an audition or a competition or a big concert. It's also specifically geared for auditions at the same time, because, well, the teachers, myself and Professor Catherine Brown from CIM, we are teachers at a conservatory. So we know exactly what goes on at our auditions, and, you know, can share this with whoever wants to participate. But the repertoire of the auditions is, for the most part, the same repertoire. It's standard repertoire. So Bach preludes and fugues, Chopin etudes, classical sonatas, romantic repertoire, modern repertoire, very broad. So basically everybody can benefit. And most importantly, obviously, we could not open it up to an infinite number of people. So there will be a maximum of 24 performers. However, observing, listening can also be very beneficial, because we are going to have, you know, not only all the performances and the interaction with the teachers would then be witnessed, but also we're going to have lectures and question and answer sessions, which also can offer an opportunity for anybody to ask questions. So, and the number of observers doesn't have the same limitations. So it's an open number. And we're going to have two separate weeks, two events. The first one is for Western Hemisphere students. And the second one, Catherine and I are going to pull some night shifts, because we're going to do, like, we're going to cater for Asia. So China, Japan, Korea, and even, you know, any other country in Asia, Indonesia, we are with like a 12 or 13 or 11 hour difference. So
remarkable. Look, I think if there's ever, you know, anything good that comes of anything, that it truly, the situation of pandemic truly globalizes our community, because now, you know, you guys are thinking in hemispheres. I mean, and I feel like it's kind of a delayed onset of 21st century, because all these technologies were here. You know, Zoom that we're using right now was available, and public traded company. Yeah, all of it was there, and it was largely sort of sitting in the margins. And now it's the only thing that drives, you know, continuum of, say, music education, but all education, but in our case, music education forward. Yeah. And delivers it to the corners of the world that we just didn't think of, you know, were fathomable, that you could have an active student participant simultaneously in Brunei and Abu Dhabi and New York, and there you are.
And I'll tell you something else. Shout out to the wonderful people at Steinway, because what they are making with Spirio is amazing. Soon, Well, I am lucky enough that I beta tested and I'm
Mhm.
still testing the technology, and I learned how to record and edit, and I have a stereo piano here in my house.
Mhm.
But the thing is, they are making it so that I can play at my house and you can have your piano, if you have a stereo, play in your living room exactly what I'm doing. So it's like instant, and it can replicate the finest nuances, as you know. Obviously, not everybody can have a stereo at home, but for instance, if I want to teach a masterclass in Beijing, and the Steinway shop there will have a stereo, and I have one in my house, I can have the student, we can connect like we are now.
Yes.
Within the stereo app, there is this possibility. We don't even have to use Zoom. I can play on my stereo, and the stereo over there will immediately replicate exactly what I'm doing. So he can watch the keyboard move and hear the same sound with the same nuances. And then he can do the same for me.
That is amazing. I think that is in a way probably a future of really high level music education. Not to ever replace being in the same room, of course,
No,
but
you
it
would never.
opens up the opportunities that were literally unfathomable. It's like
Yeah.
a science fiction movie, you know.
Yeah, and this is the other thing that is important to mention. There are, I feel, I'm not that young anymore. I'm not 20 years old anymore. No. I mean, what I mean is that I could understand if people like 70 or 80 years old, I could understand if they felt that this technology is out of touch with what they knew and what they grew up with, and they didn't want to embrace it. And strangely enough, I find more people in that age range embracing it, and
Absolutely.
fewer people in their 50s and 60s embracing it, which I cannot explain. I don't have scientific data. It's not like I polled people. This is just based on my personal experience. But it is funny. It is strange.
I know.
And I'm in my mid-40s, and I, of course, love everything that is technology, with the clear understanding that human interaction and live interaction cannot be replaced. So I would never enthusiastically embrace this technology if I didn't know that I can also play concerts with a live audience. And I hope to be able to do this again soon.
Of course.
Same thing goes for teaching. But the same way as nowadays, we were briefly touching upon how the general level of piano playing has risen, and not just piano. It's also because I can be a 14-year-old, 15-year-old now in my room on my computer, and I can go online and I can watch one of a million videos. For example, one comes to mind, Barenboim teaching a masterclass to Lang Lang.
Yes.
Or I remember another one where I think it was Jorge Bolet teaching a masterclass to Jose Fegali in London.
Yeah.
And I could go on because I've watched these videos and many more. And or you can watch Andras Schiff sitting down and sharing with an audience his thoughts on Goldberg and then playing through the whole thing.
Right. And one can watch Antonio POMPA-BALDI do the same. No,
I
but
would
seriously.
I would not put myself in that category, but what I'm saying is it's true that you can acquire so much. So by the same spirit, because we cannot be everywhere at once, but we can learn so much. And by the same spirit, especially at a time when you cannot have the live interaction, then you can at least have that and you can gain so much from it. So let's embrace it. Let's be thankful that we have it.
Oh, absolutely. I live on, online sometimes, and I watch it beyond pianists. I mean, I learn so much from great singers, actually. And I mean, all music, really.
Of
And
course.
Sometimes it's quite wonderful to listen to some, jazz or samba or
absolutely
whatever.
And it even goes beyond that. Now you have so many tutorials. For example, I was mentioning before we even started recording this, I was mentioning that I'm working on Sibelius to do some arranging. So, you know, you buy a software that you have never used. Of course, now I know it, but when I first bought it, I learned how to use it very quickly by watching YouTube tutorials. I taught myself how to use Final Cut for videos on YouTube tutorials. I taught myself how to use Logic Pro when I do some audio editing on YouTube tutorials. It is such a gold mine. In fact, the one thing that I feel very, very sad, aside from the fact that we are Western people and so we like our freedom, but and our sharing of information. But one thing that I feel very, very sad for the Chinese kids is that they cannot access YouTube. They're missing out on so much information that could help them grow on every level as human beings and as artists. So,
True.
You know, in China, they cannot access this.
Right, of course. Well, of course, there's a way to sort of hack through it, but it's not, you
VPN,
know,
but
for
it's
everybody.
not,
Yeah.
no, very few. Yeah.
Yeah, very few. No, absolutely. I'm the same. You know, I use Premiere Pro, and I just learned another tutorial for the 2020 update, and all the programs that I use, I always learn from these very helpful tutorials. Absolutely. By the way. But in a spirit of tutorials, quick questions and quick answers. What would be your top 3 recommendation for someone who is about to go into an audition?
From a psychological standpoint, it would be the same recommendation that I had for myself first when I was doing competitions, and for my students when they do competitions or auditions. Don't think of pleasing anybody. Don't play just to the judges if you are in a competition when there is an audience. And if there is no audience, imagine there is one. Always imagine you're playing to your ideal audience. And because first of all, you cannot please everyone. It's just impossible.
Yeah.
And you end up not being yourself. And if there is one thing that I value above everything else, is people who show who they are without disrespecting the text, without being eccentric for the sake of eccentricity. But if you are original, and if you are an original thinker and you show your personality, that's what I value above everything. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, in auditions in particular,
yes,
choose repertoire that can show your strengths. Don't try to choose repertoire that is just the most difficult pieces ever written and you string them all together, because if you cannot play them, you know, or if you cannot master them, because sometimes you can achieve 100% of the result by playing a piece that is not necessarily the most difficult piece ever written. The important thing is how much you can say in that little time you have in your audition. And then finally, a bit of practical advice when you go into an audition. If you can, don't drink alcohol the night before, sleep a lot, eat well, drink plenty of water, live like an athlete, so long as you are within a competition or about to do an audition. Ideally, even when you are not, but at least when you are into that mindset and mind frame. So it's practical advice, and sleep for me is one of the most important things. And this coming from a person who doesn't sleep much and has serious trouble falling asleep because I cannot turn off my brain, unfortunately. But if I don't sleep the night before a performance, I feel like I cannot give my 100%. So I always try. I have all my little tricks, and every one of us is different. All my little tricks to conquer that problem, especially when it relates to jet lag.
Yeah, of course. No, but those are very valuable. Thank you. On the practicing end of things, do you believe in practicing hands separately?
Yes. I actually was watching your interview with Jaron Kohlberg. So when he said no, and it's interesting because if you ask, well, you asked Jaron and you got an answer, you ask me and you got the opposite answer. And if you ask 10 people, you will probably get 5 and 5. It will be an equal split.
It's either or, there is no third.
But the reason why, you know, it's not for everything. You don't need it for everything. But for me, it's useful when you're trying to really achieve the most polyphonic, transparent texture, because you are educating your fingers individually within the hand to do different sounds and create different layers. And it is just more difficult to do it all at once. So if you train yourself at first to do it separate hands, you don't need to do it every time you practice a piece, but at least for a while when you're learning it, until you achieve the results you need to achieve. I would strongly recommend it.
Yeah, no, I agree. Personally, I think of it more like in using, you know, Photoshop metaphors, like layers in editing.
Yeah.
And so I kinetically remember, my body remembers the overall picture better if it's separated in layers. But it depends how your brain operates, I guess.
Yeah, it also, I think, helps the music, because most of the music we need to play is horizontal, it's not vertical. And so if you think about voices and you then isolate them and stack them up one above the other that way as lines, then it favors horizontal thinking, which helps your phrasing.
Right. Thank you very much on that. Now, matter of, you know, performance anxiety and memory and all the things that we always worry about. Some people have it to a larger degree than others. I don't think there is a person in the world who can truly and honestly say they never experienced stage fright, in whichever form it manifests. How do you deal with this? What's your experience, and what would be your advice?
It is a difficult problem and a complex matter because it's all psychological. But the thing is, first of all, I will say that we pianists have to play most of the time from memory, and it's a self-inflicted torture. I joke, because there is some advantages of in playing from memory. You can really make the music yours more, connect perhaps more with it. Although I don't think that you can't if you have the score in front of you necessarily. In fact, we have some great performers who always play from the score, or started play from the score late in life, like Richter, or you know, sometimes play from the score. I've seen pianists who I admire immensely, like Marc-André Hamelin, sometimes play from the score. It takes nothing away from what they do. It's still gorgeous. However, it is true that when you play from memory, and especially in competitions where you don't have a choice, this can be a little bit scary, because you have to maintain such a high level of concentration. And so your concentration should be laser-like much more when you play from memory, because it takes very little to throw you out. And so, like myself in the Clyburn competition finals, I had a fly that was buzzing around me during the Prokofiev third concerto in the finals. And that was so scary because it was so distracting for a while. Fortunately, it didn't derail me, but it could easily have. In any case, one of my teachers, Aldo Ciccolini, a wonderful pianist, he used to get mad at students when they talked about memory, because he said, memory problems don't exist unless you fall and hit your head and then you have amnesia. What we have is a lack of concentration or inability to stay focused. That's what we need to work on. And to a great extent, this is really true. I don't think that there is anybody who doesn't experience anxiety or even fright. If they tell you they don't, they're lying. And it's not necessarily they're lying to you. They're probably lying to themselves first. Because once you make it into an issue, then it becomes one. The other thing is, some people I know do training, like to meditate, and they do yoga to help the concentration ability. I never did that, but maybe I did without knowing what to call it, because, you know, I think relying on a routine helps you to find your place for your concentration. So, for example, my routine is very simple. Half an hour before playing, I need to be in a room by myself. I don't want to be with anybody, not because I become antisocial, but because I just need to find my space. I need to find my concentration. I think about the music. I don't want to play. I don't want an instrument that close to the performance time. If I do any warm-up, it's very rare that I do, but I do it before, not half an hour. I just need to connect with myself in that time. And this is enough. But the final piece of the equation, which I think some people may disagree with, But I think the only way to learn how to deal with this kind of situation is to be in it as often as possible. So the more you are on stage, the more you perform in public, the more you learn about yourself. And there cannot be one system that fits everyone. You have to learn about yourself, and then you have to find your own way to deal with this psychological issue. And so frequently performing is really helpful. And I always tell my students, if you don't have many chances to play in public frequently, make chances. Like, ask, if you frequent a church, ask, your fellow churchgoers if you can play for them. Or if you have friends, invite them over. Or just your studio mates, invite them into even a practice space and just play for each other. And then, of course, the official occasions where you have to perform. Studio class, jury, recitals, festivals, competitions, any opportunity you got. The more, the merrier. Because the more you do it, the more you learn, and the more you push the anxiety to the back of your mind, and the music comes to the forefront.
That's excellent advice. Thank you. And another thing I wanted to ask you, I read in an interview that you were talking about finding your sound. How would you, in short, describe the process, and what can people, young pianists, start doing right now to find theirs?
I think the one thing that's beautiful about playing an instrument is that no matter the fact that we play the same instrument and even the same music, and even if we study with the same teacher and are told exactly the same things, if you and I sit down and play it, we will play it differently. And it is true that some of it is through our own sense of timing and our own imagination and how it differs. But imagination also affects the sound. And wherever you come into your mind to a place where you have a sound crystallized there for a specific passage that you want, your body will have its own different way of going about producing that sound. And your way will be different than mine. So in this sense, it's really important that we don't focus too much on just imitating what other people do. And at the same time, you can take the principles of what they do, but filter them through your own imagination. And how do you build up an imagination? In music specifically, yeah, it's also an innate thing, but in music specifically, the more you listen and the more you listen to other instruments other than piano, symphonic music, chamber music, music for any other instrument, obviously the human voice, not only opera, but also lieder. And also the more you play with other instruments, the more you learn. And for me, finding my sound was about creating specific images in my mind that connect to the way other instruments go about achieving those sounds. Like, for example, I often talk about the use of the elbow or the use of the wrist at the piano. I don't use any different words than violinists or cellists use. I tell my students, your bowing is wrong here. You need to change your bowing. And of course, when they don't know me or they hear me say this for the first time, they think I'm crazy because, of course, they don't play with a bow. But when they start imagining it, they immediately change their sound, relax their arms, and do certain movements and gain flexibility with their elbows and wrists and so on. That changes their sound. But ultimately, what is produced is such a synthesis of so many different variables, including the way your fingertips go about touching the keys, our prehensile quality. We caress people differently. We feel differently, the same way we feel the keys differently. So, but some general principles are the same. Absolutely. The important thing is to never stop searching. But first, sound comes from your heart and your mind, and then you search for. It's like Michelangelo used to say, you know, I just have to liberate the sculpture from the stone.
Right. Yeah, that's a beautiful metaphor. Liberate the sculpture from the stone. Yes, that's what we do. Liberate the sound from silence, right?
Yeah, exactly.
What was the most valuable advice you received, you think, professionally?
There were many, some of which I've incorporated in my own thinking and may come out now when I speak in a different way or with more details, but it comes from somebody. We all pick up things from people, and nothing is done in a vacuum. But perhaps the most important advice was to learn how to take rejection and to learn your worth and your value, even in the face of being rejected many times. Because in life, and specifically in music, we will go through many instances in which we give it our all and we are not successful. Maybe we are auditioning for a competition and we don't even get in. We play in a competition, we don't advance or we don't win. We audition for a school, we don't get selected, and so on. Right now, we audition for a job, we don't get chosen. Right. Anything. So to learn that rejection is part of life and it should make you stronger, it should make you learn. We always hope that it comes from an honest choice that has integrity. Sometimes it may not, and we may feel dejected because of it, but we still should not let it destroy us. And especially when one is very young, this is very dangerous. In fact, I also try, when I listen to young people and have to deliver commentary that is maybe not positive or criticism that is not positive, try to always take into account that you're talking to human beings that have hopes and aspirations and that have invested so much time and effort in what they do. So you cannot be dismissive of that. You can and should share why you thought their effort did not quite meet the demands and some other people exceeded their level and so got chosen. But you know, I have seen, and I have also experienced personally, some of these teachers when I was very young being dismissive, not to me very often, but to other people, and hurting and even wounding people. And that is something that I don't tolerate.
Yeah, I know. I've been on the receiving end of that early on sometimes.
But
in Russia,
we can help people getting stronger by talking to them about it, just like people talk to me. Namely, I remember one of my teachers, Anna Maria Pennella.
Yes.
Yeah, I met her at a stage of my life when I really needed to hear those words. And she was instrumental in my mindset completely changing and not being focused on playing for a jury or playing for an audience only to please them, and just being putting all my sense of worth into the recognition that I was expecting and hoping to have. When it didn't come, then what was left was like nothing. So it was very important, very helpful for me to hear that. And I always, you know, try to share this with students, particularly when I sense that they specifically need that, because it's true. It's not just a bunch of words to make you feel better. It's just true.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, that's very insightful. Again, thank you, Antonio. What would be the one thing you would say to a teacher?
What I just said. I mean, first of all, I don't know if I can say to a teacher anything like this, but ideally I would say, I don't know how it would be received, but I would say, don't get too hung up on methods. Methods are really not for people. People are not really easily fit into boxes or categories or compartmentalization, whatever that long word is.
Yes.
So it's important to remain flexible. And yes, some principles are okay. But I think it's the only way to teach one-on-one is to really understand who your students are and what they need and how you can help them. And so just constantly rethink and retool your system. But also what I just said, always be mindful of how you tell a student that they're doing something you think it's wrong, and how you can help them get better. Don't try to put them down.
That's very important.
Because, you know, I have received some I witnessed some bad things, but also some wonderful things. So, for example, I remember once I went to attend a workshop taught by Ciccolini. Again, I named this incredible artist. And he was teaching, and there was a very few select number of students, maybe 5 or 6 that were allowed to play for him, all very high level. And there was this one girl who wanted to play for him, and the organizer of the workshop somehow got moved to, I wouldn't say pity, but you know, just to let her try to play for Ciccolini. But we were all afraid that Ciccolini was going to get mad because this girl really couldn't play. And instead, what we witnessed was amazing. He explained to her after she played very, very terribly. He explained to her very patiently that, you know, it was for her own sake that she should perhaps wait until she improved a little bit to not feel out of place with other people that were playing at a much more proficient level, but still gave her a lot of advice specifically to what she could do to improve. And that was wonderful to see. And the girl felt good about herself in the end, even though in the end she still wouldn't be admitted to the rest of the workshop and couldn't perform in the final concert. But she was not wounded at all.
Yeah, well, that's the art of teaching. That's the art of teaching. Yeah. What would be the one thing you say to a parent of a music student?
Oh, well, I am a parent of a music student, and I swear to you and to everybody who will care to listen to this, that if you ask my daughter's teachers, and they also happen to be friends and colleagues, her first piano teacher was not mom or dad, it was Sandra Shapiro in the prep department of CIM. And you can ask Sandra, I got as little involved with the teacher as possible, just because I didn't want to get in the way. Although from afar, you have to watch, you have to see what your child is doing.
Sure.
But the same now with the cello teachers, you know, Pamela Kelly and now Richard Weiss. I try to stay away, not because I don't care. I try to always inform myself on what's going on in the lessons. And then I ask my daughter herself, okay, what did the teacher say about this or that? And a few times when we play together and I share something I think musically about a piece, then I always tell her, you have to check with your teacher if it's okay to do this or not. So to the parents, especially if they are musicians, I would say watch, but try to stay away from interfering. And if you are not a teacher, try to be humble enough to know that the teacher knows more than you do. Finally, no matter how talented you think your kid is, there will be always people who are more talented. And this doesn't mean your kid is not worthy of time and attention and effort. But please don't be so competitive because it ends up being distractive.
Yeah, that's very wise, actually. Great advice.
And the final thing I wanted to say is, and this is perhaps not so nice, but because oftentimes I wasn't very successful, when I used to be teaching pre-college, years ago, I decided I would not teach pre-college specifically for this reason. It became such an issue to have to deal with parents who were not that way. So
right. Well, that's why I think it's an important question to ask of you, because, you know, this is a reality for a music educator. Almost, I mean, unless you're dealing with really, you know, artist level, you know, college and postgraduate people, the parents are always there in the picture, as it were. And that relationship affects the growth and the process of a music student. Yeah. And then finally, what would you say to a music student?
Oh, that you probably chose one of the most difficult paths that there are in terms of effort required to achieve proficiency, in terms of countless number of hours you will need to dedicate in order to be any good at all. And then you will end up being rejected many times. You will end up not getting rich. You will end up maybe also running into ignorance on the part of many people who think that you do this as a hobby and it's not a real job. And all of the above may make you think, okay, maybe this is not worth it. Quite the contrary, it is also the worthiest of career paths you could choose, because it's not just a career, it's a vocation and it's a passion. And it's a way of improving the world. It's a way of sharing beauty, creating more beauty, propagating it, making people into better human beings. So there is nothing better that you could do with your time and with yourself. Just know that you need to be very strong and perseverant.
Oh, that's beautiful, Antonio. Poet couldn't have said it more graciously. And no, it's a wonderful advice to any young pianist who is listening and who is planning on dedicating themselves to the art form. And finally, to wrap it up, I have so many more questions for you. We might have to do second episode sometime in the summer, if you would be so kind. Because I wanted to discuss your recordings and how you choose repertoire, but that will be another hour. But I think we will wrap up on a very nice final question is, what would you say to yourself at 20?
Oh, I've been asked this before. It's a very interesting question. I would say to myself at 20, to not worry so much and not sweat too much the little things. I've always been very like a warrior, a person who worries about many things. And I think things end up taking care of themselves for the most part. And also to look at the big picture more. That's what I would tell myself back then.
That's good. I would say that myself too. That is wonderful, Antonio. Thank you so much for joining me and for sharing your ideas.
Such a great pleasure, Konstantin. I'm very, very happy that you thought of me for this, and I will continue to watch the other episodes that you record. So thank you.
Thank you, and I hope to see you maybe after the summer audition intensive.
Please, I'll be happy to to be here with you again anytime.
Thank you so much, Antonio. Be well. Stay safe.
Thank you.